All right, everybody, welcome to Chapter 9, or the first video of the last unit of this semester. So, um, just as a quick note, when we start going over these chapters, these last 5 chapters, I believe it is, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, um, sounds like a lot with 5 chapters, but it's all pretty easy stuff, in my opinion. I think it's the easiest of the sections in our course. But with that being said, there's going to be a lot of information where you've probably done it or you've been a part of it. You're just hearing it in different terminology now. Do not take it for granted. While I think this is the easiest information, I also think it's one that will come back to bite you in the butt if you do not take it seriously. Okay, so let's get started. Chapter 9, we're going to talk about the principles of exercise training. So we're going to go over some terminology, some training principles, different training domains, and then the types of training. So when we started talking in Chapter 8 with the cardiovascular aspect, it was the acute effects of exercise. So all of which that we talked about was basically acute, meaning that that's what our heart rate, that's what our blood pressure, all that type stuff, that's what that does in the immediate effects of exercise. So if you were to go out and run up and down your street right now, all of that stuff is going to happen. A lot of the stuff that we're going to start coming in and talking about now is going to be more chronic adaptations. So stuff that's going to take a lot longer to take effect. So it's not going to happen after one bout of exercise. It's going to have to take many bouts of exercise for these adaptations to occur. And when we talk about that, resistance training is going to be the one that allows for muscular adaptations, while aerobic is going to be more adaptations associated with the heart and lungs as we move forward. So some of the terminology: muscular strength is the max force generation for a muscle or a muscle group. One repetition maximum is the maximum amount of weight that one can lift or push or pull for one repetition. So not that you go and you lift a 25-pound plate for 1 rep, so that's a 1 rep max. Not the case. It's the maximum amount of weight that you can lift within that 1 rep. When we start talking about muscular power, that's going to be our work divided by time, and work is equal to force times distance. So when we go with a bench press, for example, did we do it in 1 second versus 2 seconds? That's going to be more powerful if we did it in 1 second, because it's a faster lift, so to speak. Okay. Then when we talk about muscular endurance, that's going to sustain repeated muscular contraction over time. So for example, push-ups or wrestling, that's muscular endurance. So not all the time is endurance meaning, running or anything like that, but how long can you sustain a muscular contraction? Because if you can sustain something for a lot longer, then you're going to have a lot more muscular endurance if what you're doing requires some muscular strength as well. So it's a number of reps at a certain percentage of 1 rep max as well. Okay. So a little bit of a comparison here. So if we talk about it, strength, athlete A, B, and C. If we're looking at strength, actually, the athlete B and C are stronger than that of athlete A. Okay. However, when we look at power, if athlete A lifts that lift in they're doing, look at the joules here. Okay, that's going to be your key. Okay, that's going to be our component of power. Instead of me reading through everything, you can read it, but let's just skip to the joules, okay, the equal amount, right? He did this, or she did this with, 1,100, let's just round it up to 1,200 joules, per second. Athlete B did that one, and again, I'll just round up 600 joules per second. So if we're looking at it, obviously, athlete A is powerful. Now, relative, because of this weight difference, right? He may not be technically as powerful, okay? If we look at it, that's just about 2 times the amount. So if you divide that by 2, that's about what you get. So they're probably just about equally as powerful, okay? But now let's look at athlete C. One of the heavier amounts for strength and still completed 1,200 joules, okay? But look, all that is time dependent. Half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, okay? So we have to start taking into account time when we're looking at power. And then whenever we look at it, if we're looking at 75% of their 1 rep max, this individual did 10 repetitions, this individual did 10 repetitions, and this individual did 5 repetitions. So while this individual over here, athlete C, may actually be the strongest and possibly one of the more powerful of the 3, they don't have a lot of muscular endurance. Athlete B is strong, doesn't create a lot of power, but is pretty endurance based. And then athlete A, not very strong, is powerful, and has muscular endurance. So there's different ways that we can look at everybody, okay? It's not always, how heavy can you lift? Well, okay, that's great. You can lift a lot for one time, but if I ask you to do something for a sustained amount of time, do you have any endurance? Do you have any power behind it? Okay, so there's different aspects when we're talking about all the different aspects of physical training. So if we also look at aerobic power or capacity, that would be stuff like our VO2 max test. It is limited, however, by our cardiovascular system, meaning that, it only goes as far as our cardiovascular system can take us. All right, we just got done with the cardiovascular chapters. So again, if we can't get enough blood going, right, doesn't really matter what else we can do, because if we can't get the blood going, then we don't get what we need. We don't get the oxygen. So it's very limited by that. The rate of energy released by that cellular metabolic process that depend on continued availability of oxygen. So again, if I want a larger VO2 max, I need to get more oxygen into the working muscles. Well, guess what? Our cardiovascular system is going to be the limiting factor in that aspect. When we talk about our anaerobic power or our anaerobic capacity, that would be something similar to our Wingate test. If you want to know what the Wingate test looks like, go through, look at that YouTube link, or go and look up YouTube and look at Wingate cycle tests. Essentially what it is that we have you pedal for 30 seconds all out. I mean, as hard as you can. And I'm going to tell you now, it's only 7% of your body weight is the resistance. That doesn't sound like a lot, but I promise you, by the time you get to the last 5 to 10 seconds of that testing, it feels like you are sludging through mud in a bicycle, okay? And what it is, again, we're looking at the rate of that cellular metabolic processes when we have no oxygen, okay? When we're doing a VO2 max, while we're sticking on this slide, that's one where we are hooking you up. We have the oxygen. I mean, we could do a Wingate test just like that as well, but the aerobic VO2 max test, we're looking for you to go for 12, 15, 18 minutes at a time. The Wingate test, 30 seconds. No matter who gets on there, the test is 30 seconds, meaning you're not getting enough time for that exercise to where we are getting oxygen into the cells to where we're becoming very oxidative, okay? So some of our training principles, they can be applied to aerobic, anaerobic, and resistance training. There's no principle that cannot be applied to all of it. We have the principle of individuality. meaning that each person responds differently. And a lot of that is genetics. So if you were to take my strength and conditioning course, one of the big things that I talk about is that just because you do a program, let's say you write up a program, a workout program, and you test it out on yourself, okay? You follow it 100% to the T, no matter what, and you see a lot of strength gains or a lot of lean muscle mass gains. That's great. I'm going to tell you now, you could probably apply that to a lot of people, meaning that it might be a good program, but do not expect everybody to gain the same amount of lean muscle mass, the same amount of strength or power or whatever it may be as you did. That's our principle of individuality, meaning that everybody's going to respond differently. So we can't just have cookie cutter aspects to our training. There's parts of it that we can, but there's always going to be parts that we need to manipulate. So it's really important that you program or design something for each individual, right? If you were to look at a track team, let's say you're training a track team. Well, guess what, guys? A track team is not just your sprinters. It's your long distance. It's your shot put. It's your discus. It's field games. It's all of it. That's your track and field. Okay, so you need to make sure, things are done that helps that individual perform for what they want to do. And then the degree of change will vary. Are you a high responder or a low responder? In other words, if we took a program that was, let's say you go to bodybuilding.com and you download whoever, Steve Cook's, big man on campus. Again, Steve Cook did something that showed results in him. And obviously it will help a lot of people. They will get bigger muscle mass wise, stronger, everything else. But here's the thing. What if you're somebody that by the time you're on week 2, the progressions that he's making seem way too easy for you? Okay. Now I'm saying that you followed everything and you're actually pushing yourself. That means that you're a high responder, meaning that you need something that might move a lot faster and adapt a lot faster. Or if you're somebody that can't do what he's asking you to do by week 2, then you might be a low responder, meaning that you need something that's going to move a little slower and allow for you to adapt, meaning everybody is different. Specificity, adaptation specific for the mode, intensity, and duration of an activity. It needs to be very specific. Would you take a shot putter and have them go run miles? No. There might be a time in the season where they may want to do something. Okay, well, that's whatever in the off season. But if they're actually training for something, at what point do they need to run miles in the shot put? They don't. They need to be more along the lines of lifting weight, doing more power-based exercises, because that's a power movement. Okay. So you need to stress those most relevant muscle groups. The principle of reversibility, meaning any gains will be lost during decreased training or stoppage, meaning just because you made gains does not mean they're with you forever. We are very much a system that is a use it or lose it type of system. So if you're trying to do something and you don't want to continue breaking down the body in the sense where you may have been breaking it down when you're doing a heavy strength program, you need to implement a maintenance program, something that's a little maybe lighter weight, but still stresses those muscle groups to maintain those muscular gains that you've made or the strength gains that you've made. Progressive overload. Oh, real quick on the reversibility, I'm going to tell you now, it's also going to be something where it's going to take a lot longer to create a gain than it is to lose the gain. And I'm talking, it may take you a couple months to gain, 2 pounds of muscle mass. You can lose that within a week or 2. So it is really and truly a use it or lose it type of system. Progressive overload, systematically increase stress on a body for improvement, meaning that we need to fight through complacency. Sure, are you going to see a few adaptations if I tell you to put 95 pounds on the barbell and just continually rep out 3 sets of 15 reps each day? Sure, you'll see a little something, but eventually those gains or those adaptations will cease, meaning that we progressively need to be putting more weight on the bar, more sets possibly, more or less repetitions depending upon the number, or the weight that you place on the bar. So we have to continually stress the body for it to make an adaptation to occur. Remember when we were talking neurologically, a lot of the training aspects that we do at the very beginning of programs is neurologically based. All right, remember how I was telling you about the Golgi tendon organs? You know, you can't lift a 20-pound dumbbell, but after a week of lifting the 15s, all of a sudden it's light, and now the 20-pounder, we can do that, but we can't do the 25, right? So if we want it to get stronger, if we want to adapt the body, we have to constantly stress it into new heights. So if we look at it, this is what you want to see. This dark red line is how you want your programs to be implemented and show results. It's a stair-step method, meaning if we started here, once we start training, obviously all the new stressors are going to put a stress on the body. You're going to be sore. You're going to actually fatigue pretty quick. But all of a sudden we'll hit a point in that where we start to overcome that. Now our baseline fitness, we've surpassed it, and we hit a new baseline. Okay. Well, what happens then? That means like our 1 rep max has improved. So now, whatever that was, maybe 80%, okay, of your 1 rep max. If the 1 rep max improves or gets higher, well, you can still do 80% because guess what? Where am I? There we go. Because guess what? That 80% is now technically different because it's 80% of a new weight. What's going to happen? Of course, we see everything again. You fatigue a little bit. Then we hit a stage where we start to come back up. We get a new phase. It continues up and up and up. All that is done by proper progressions. It's done by proper rest periods. It's done by proper training frequencies, okay? If we train too frequently at too high of a percentage and don't give the body enough time to rest, we start to see this portion down here occur. This is the risk of overtraining. And when we start to overtrain, it's not, okay, I'll just take a week off the gym. No, it's like you're going to take about a month or so away from the gym before your body can kind of let it all out. And then you can start back, and you may be starting back lower than your original baseline fitness. So again, make sure everything's properly progressive. Make sure it's proper frequency, proper durations, all right? We do that. We get to those stair-step methods by a system called periodization, meaning that we change the variables. Maybe it's the mode. Maybe you go from strength to power or endurance. Maybe it's, if we take, for instance, the idea of aerobic training. Maybe it's cycling to running to swimming, okay? What's your volume? How much are you actually, how much stress are you actually putting on your body in total, right? For the day, for the week, okay? Sure, it may be no big deal for you to go run 10 miles today, okay? But if you sit there, that's 10 miles of volume today. If you do that every day in a week, that's 70 miles of volume, okay? So you got to start thinking about it like that. It can't always just be today, all right? What's your intensity? Maybe we changed up. Maybe you need to go up to be able to see some adaptations. Maybe the intensity is actually too high and you can't complete what we need you to do in the proper fashion. So let's knock down the intensity a little bit. It allows for your training stimulus to remain challenging and effective. So again, you want it to remain just challenging enough to where it creates that little dip, and then we start to overcome and we reach a new high point, and then we do it all over again. When we're looking at this, the macro cycle is an entire year. You can also think about it as the macro cycle could potentially be 4 years if you're looking at an Olympic athlete. So really and truly, the macro is whatever the time period is that is from start point to your end point. Maybe it's 24 weeks. That's a half a year. That's 6 months. Okay. So maybe that's your macro. Well, inside of that, we have other little breaks. We have mesocycles, and that may be different phase periods that we want to go through. Okay. Those are typically several weeks, maybe a month at a time. Okay. And then inside of that, we have microcycles. Those are usually a week or a day at a time. Okay. So it's not always just one thing that changes. Things can change and adapt throughout the entirety of a program. And this is what's happening. Look at what happens when we look at a prep period. That's going to be something like a off season where you're more concerned about building strength. Okay. That's volume intense. Intensity is pretty high. As far as technique, that's going to be your yellow, right? Not very big on the technique, okay? As we start to shift into our transition period, so that may be part of the preseason, look what starts to happen. Volume goes down, intensity goes up, and technique goes up. That might be even sport-specific activities. We might not be doing it a lot, but what we are doing is going to be technique-based, and it's going to be at high intensity. And then when you get into the competition period, your volume goes down, meaning that you're probably not lifting as much or as frequently. You may be not training as much frequently, but when you do, it's going to be intense and very technique-based. And then when we get to the active rest portion of things, everything goes down, right? You want to be as technically sound and as intense as you can be at your peak time, which is at the end of competition, which is typically when championships occur. When we start talking about resistance training modeled to specific desired outcomes. Are you wanting strength, power, hypertrophy? So do you want larger muscle, muscular endurance? Do you want to be able to do something for a lot longer period? Or is it just gross motor performance? So meaning more sport-specific base. You're going to always train your large groups before your small groups. So if you're doing an upper body day, do your chest and back before you do your arms. Okay? So chest, back, shoulders, arms. That's how you do it. Biggest to smallest. Multi-joint before single joint. So if we're looking at it on a lower body day, again, squats, leg press, stuff like that before leg extensions and leg curls and whatever it might be, potentially RDLs, okay? High intensity before low intensity, meaning you're always going to program your power and your strength work first. Why? Because you want the body to be as charged as possible, because power exercises are explosive. So you want to still be explosive. Strength exercises are going to take a high percentage to complete. So it's going to be a large load on the body. You want it to be as fresh as possible. Then you do your hypertrophy, and then you do your endurance work. Okay. Also, think about it this way. If you're doing leg day, you want your power moves, which could be something like a box jump. Yes, I understand there's no weights involved, but that's your body weight moving up, and it's powerful. Do you want to do box jumps at the very beginning, or would you rather do those at the end after you've done all heavy legs and your legs are shaking? You tell me what your shins would prefer you to do, okay? When we're also looking at rest periods for resistance training, 2 to 3 minutes for beginners, 1 to 2 minutes for advanced. Yeah, that's true. But it's also very indicative or dependent upon what the exercise is. Strength and power probably need more along the lines of that 3 minutes of rest, even for advanced lifters. Hypertrophy, probably about a minute to a minute and a half. And then endurance, you're going to be looking at anything 60 seconds or less, okay? The repetition continuum. Now, this is a good picture, but there's also another picture that is a little better. So if we look at the number of repetitions, strength and power are biggest when we use them between 2 and 6 reps, okay? Hypertrophy is more your bigger player between 7 and 12. And then anything really over 12 is where we're going to get muscular endurance. But that doesn't mean that you're not getting some form of muscular endurance when you're doing strength work. Okay? It just is not the main player. All right? So really and truly, these should all be colored throughout everything. But where they are the darkest is where you're going to see the most come out for that particular type of aspect. So again, if we're looking at, oops, oh, I didn't want to do that either. So if we're looking at, ACSM for resistance training programs, strength development, anywhere between 60 to 70 for new people and, people that haven't done anything. As you progress down here, you're going to look at all this, okay? Even if we sit there and we say, go down here to development of muscle power, sure, advanced individuals are going to use 85 to 100% on certain lifts, but there's still times and portions of their training programs where these advanced lifters may be only using 30 to 60% because they're trying to maybe just work on speed and technique, okay? But this is typically the type of guidelines we would follow for resistance training aspects. If we're looking at resistance training here, some of the differences that we'll see, the difference between free weights and machines. So for free weights, that weight is constant, okay? Doesn't change no matter where it's at. It's always going to be 25 pounds. But it is limited by your weakest point, okay? If you were to go to a, let's say any machine, let's say the bicep curl machine, all right, the difference is between that versus doing it with a free weight is that typical point, which is right about here, or, okay, where someone may get stuck, right, before they can just fully pull it all the way up. You're limited by that with your free weights. The machines, because they're a pulley system, kind of have safeguards where it'll help you get through that weak point, okay? So that is a good thing about machines, especially if we look at it in older individuals or beginners, because we're able to put them through a full range of motion. If we look at free weights, cheating limits your strength gains, meaning this is typically where I'd show somebody swinging up, right, for bicep curls. You're cheating yourself. Sure, you went up in weight, but really and truly you've engaged so many more muscles that that's not really your bicep lifting that dumbbell anymore. For free weights, you are getting more motor unit recruitment, again, because there's more aspects of it being contracted throughout the whole muscular portion that you're training with free weights, okay? Your stabilizers are more engaged, right? Or the muscles that are trying to slow down the movement are more engaged based off of what's going on. Now, sport-specific movements, maybe not so much, only the fact that because those weights, you can move them in different angles, all right, lifting in different angles, to where machines, it's one way only. There's no changing it around, okay? But it is, we would look at machines better for older individuals or those new to exercise because they are safer. Balance is not a big key issue in that point, okay? But if you're intermediate or you're advanced, probably your biggest aspects need to be with free weights. Eccentric training. So we're able to generate more force. So that force velocity curve that we originally learned about. helps you improve your gains on the eccentric portion. How many of you have ever gone to work out and it is easier for you possibly to lift or to lower a weight, but you can't lift the weight off the chest possibly? Well, if we look at that, a lot of the times is we've started to engage maybe the chest. If we take the bench press, for example, we've engaged the chest to stabilize and help lower the weight way too soon. The key to a strong bench is to have a strong back as well. So eccentric training, it's training those muscles to handle a load that is heavier than what your typical concentric motion can be. And once you've had that after a while, then it becomes easier for you to lift it concentrically. Okay, it helps with your strength gains. Negatives is what I was basically talking about. Variable resistance training, that's going to be where resistance is decreased at the weak point. That's going to be more adapted towards machines, again, because they help you through that weak point. Or we can sit there and we can do it with free weights by using bands or chains. So if you do chains on, let's say, a bench press, when you're fully extended, those chains are hanging as long as they can be. They can be 90 pounds, for instance. As I lower that weight, those chains start to curl around the ground. Well, guess what? The load is becoming lighter. So it's heavy, lighter, 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 lightest as it's going to be. And then as you press up, it gets heavier and heavier. So what that's going to do is it's going to help you stress that weak point and work through it. Okay. We have isometric training. That's static, meaning like the contraction is resistance, static, meaning it's not changing. That's going to be something like a plank, okay? Or go stand in the door well or door frame and press against it. There's nothing that's changing, right? We're unable to reproduce some of the initial studies that have shown increases, but it may be important in rehab to reduce atrophy. It's not putting a lot of stress on the body. It's not contracting the body's muscles in the sense where it's putting a lot of damage to them. So it's allowing us to somewhat maintain some muscle mass to help reduce atrophy in potential rehab aspects or injury and sickness. Isokinetic, so that's going to be where speed remains consistent or constant. No matter how hard you press, no matter how hard you pull, that speed is going to be the exact same. Okay, now we can measure it. It measures your power and torque that you're creating, but no matter how hard you kick out, that doesn't mean that that arm that we're looking at down here is going to move any faster. Okay, it is going to be a specialized machine that allows for you to do that, and we can figure out what your maximal force is through a full range of motion. Okay. Plyometrics, that's going to help with our stretch shortening cycle. That elastic energy that we build in musculotendinous components increase during rapid stretching. So again, something like this, stepping off of a bench and immediately jumping. Okay. Your series elastic components, those SEC, act as a spring. Concentric movement is immediate. That spring will add force to production in normal concentric contraction. If it's not an immediate transfer, it's lost as heat. So it's not like you can step off, slowly go down, and then come up. It's literally as soon as both feet hit the ground, you need to bounce up. That would be similar to plyometrics or bounding, where you bound from side to side. As soon as you hit, boom, you need to go boom, 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 boom. What that's helping is it's helping the body understand and adapt to some of that strain, okay? Because you're adding gravity to that now. So once you hit, boom, go up, and it's allowing for some of that stretch to be an adaptation that's going to allow for you to initially or in the future gain more strength in that aspect. Core stability and strength. So resistance training is going to provide a better stability and force would transfer to the extremities. Biomechanical efficiency, so less wasted movements. So again, we may talk about this when we talk about the effects of running. Someone needs to be biomechanically efficient. The more efficient you are, the less energy you're using to perform the motion. So therefore, the less tiring or fatiguing it's going to be. Resistance training, if we're looking at our core and stability and strength, it's going to help decrease injury risk. A lot of that deals with the lower back. Type 1 fibers respond to those high reps, high sets, and typically our core stability is going to be type 1 fibers. Your abs, your lower back, all that, even in the calves, are type 1 what's the word I'm looking for? There's more type 1 than there's type 2 because all those aspects are stabilizers, meaning that they need to make sure that you're in place, or they need to be able to withstand a lot of force all the time. You're sitting up. So what maintains your posture? That's your abs. When you're walking, what helps maintain and not tire you out? That's going to be your calves. Okay, so this is one of those things also when we look at biomechanical efficiency. This right here, when you put that straight back, you're not loading and putting undue stress on these muscles back here. Okay. Anaerobic and aerobic power, interval training, bouts of high to moderate intensity with a rest that's reduced intensity, greater volume of exercise due to the breaks, allowing for greater intensity. So you can do reps, sets, distance, time, intervals, rest, all of which can be changed to increase or decrease intensity. Interval intensity, typically we go by percentage of heart rate max or specific duration. For instance, like a sprint, meaning 40 yards, 50 yards, stuff like that. It's a specific distance. You need to go at 100% of your best time, then at 90% of that ATP PCR. That's how you're going to train it, depending upon what system you want to train. Active recovery, low intensity. Trained may increase intensity of the interval and decrease recovery time. So what does that mean for lactate? Again, that means that we're constantly being at that aspect of lactate threshold where we eventually push past it and we can continue to work past that point and not see fatigue set in as quickly. Continuous training. There's no intervals. This is all oxidative. That's long, slow duration or distance. Low intensities, 60 to 80% of the heart rate max, less cardiorespiratory stress, more joint muscle stress. So we do run the risk of potential overuse on these aspects. Need to maintain your race pace to reduce injury and overuse. Meaning, if you're trying to run a marathon and the fastest you can run your marathon is 23 or 2.5 hours, when you train and you run marathon distance, you need to run at a pace of 2.5 hour marathon. Why? Because if suddenly you just run a marathon in 3 hours, now that's 30 extra minutes of stress on the joints that is going to eventually build up over time. And then continuous training is good for overall aerobic endurance, no matter who you are. Fartlek training, that's going to be speed play, high speed running to jogging changes, constant interval. Helps mimic movement patterns. This is specifically good for athletes in sports such as soccer, right? Where it's not a constant run, it's not a constant sprint, but it's also not, you don't have time to sit there and rest. Interval circuits, a circuit of 3,000 to 10,000 meters and a station every 400 to 1,600 meters. Jog, run, sprint, and at the different stations you can have strength, flexibility, or muscular endurance aspects to get overall rounded training. High intensity intervals, 4 to 6 seconds of 30, or 4 to 6 sets of 30 seconds each. with 3 minutes of rest. Why would we want 3 minutes of rest? Because typically if we're going for 30 seconds, it needs to be as high intensity as possible. I mean, you're going all out. Meaning we're going to have 2 to 3 minutes of total exercise over the course of 20 minutes. This is one aspect that can dramatically improve your VO2 max in untrained individuals. Why? Because you're only asking them to work for 30 seconds, and then they get 3 minutes of rest. But the training also benefit. And it can help because you're replacing 10 to 15% possibly of training volume with their high intensity interval. That's less time if they have compacting the joints, okay? So that's the end of video 1. That's chapter 9. Next thing we're going to talk about is the adaptations that occur when we utilize those principles within resistance training. All right, guys, have a good one.